Hello and welcome to the Collecting Heroes podcast. I'm your host JD, the collector of collectors, and this is the place where I interview pop culture collectors from around the world. Today I'm not going around the world, I'm staying within my backyard. In fact, only a couple hours away from where I live right now with a collector who, he is that bloke. In fact, he is that Star Wars bloke. His name is Luke Kellett, and he's from Newcastle, Australia. Luke, thanks for being on the show.
G'day, JD. Thanks so much for having me here. It's lovely to meet another absolute nerd very close to home.
Yes, 100%. And I mean, people may hear the accent a little bit there as well. Obviously, I said you are from Australia, but technically by way of England.
Yeah, born in Yorkshire, so my vowels are like bus and bucket and go away and all that stuff. So, but yeah, I'm definitely a hybrid these days. I don't sound Australian to the Aussies, and I don't sound like I'm from Yorkshire to those from back home. So stuck in the middle, but that's all right.
Yes, yeah, I've noticed that when I watch the reels, I was always like, "There's a little bit of accent there." I couldn't try. I was trying to pick it, but
and to be honest, it depends on how many beers I've had. The more beers, the more Yorkshire comes out.
Is there a good beer in Yorkshire? I know this isn't supposed to be beer talk, but is there a good beer from Yorkshire?
Do you know that? Well, Brewdog Brewhouse, I believe, is from Leeds in Yorkshire, so that's where it started. But that is Brewdog is long after I left the UK, and before that, there wasn't much craft beer. Like my memory of drinking beer in England is warm and flat. So. Not until I have since I've moved to Australia, there's some great breweries, but not when I grew up there. It was a very different place in the 90s to what it is in 2020.
And you prefer your beer cold now, I imagine?
Beer cold's good, especially in Australia, especially in 40-degree weeks, days, months.
Yes. I actually and we will definitely get into Star Wars chat, but I drove up to Newcastle. This is pre-pandemic. I think it was 2019. I think it may have been around what is called Australia Day here. And we actually made the drive up because it's a public holiday to swim at the Bogey Hole, I believe.
Yeah. It's the oldest. Newcastle. It's the oldest man-made outdoor pool, I think, in Australia. They made all the convicts with their bare hands dig it out for the magistrate or whoever it was that was looking after Newcastle back in the day. But it's an amazing swimming hole. It's incredible.
It was beautiful. I actually, it was a great day, but we just made this. We just said, screw it. One day we're just gonna drive up and on this day, and it was a 42-degree day, I believe. And for people in the US, because I have a lot of US listeners, that's well over 100 degrees. I believe it's like close to 110 maybe. But it's just. Yeah, it was a 3-hour drive from here to get to the Bogey Hole, but it was worth it when we got to go swimming there. It was a beautiful day, beautiful swim, and then I got to get Doughhead's donuts on the way home because I am a foodie, and we've been talking about the fact that is one of the best donut places around.
Definitely in Australia. Well, when you next come up, I'm taking you there, and we can talk Star Wars in person and eat donuts.
Yes, yeah, and let's start talking Star Wars, right? Because I did invite you on to talk Star Wars.
Sounds good. But hey, donuts and bogey holes, that's also fine. Beer, donuts, bogey holes, a good start.
It's good. I mean, like, we can talk, obviously, things that we're familiar with, both being around a similar area, but also, you know, like the accent might be different, but when you're speaking geek, it's all the same, right? So let's jump in. How did you get into Star Wars?
Well, Star Wars for me was... it's a kind of there's two answers to that question. First time and the answer with my dad. So in 1992, watching Return of the Jedi on VHS.
Nice.
And that was my first memory of Star Wars, seeing all the Ewoks and various things like that. And you know, kind of experiencing Star Wars for the first time with my dad, thinking, you know, he's holier than holy, and seeing all this stuff as like a young boy was pretty awesome. And then I had a big gap, I would say, of Star Wars, and I think most people did in the 90s. So there wasn't much really happening, was there, between, well, I guess after Empire Strikes Back, so we had a couple of things. After
Mm,
Return of the Jedi, we had a couple of things, and then my next introduction was actually a cinema experience watching a Phantom Menace.
nice.
So I was how old would I have been? That was 99. So I'm 35. So I was 11 or 12, going to see a Phantom Menace at the cinema with my dad, which was a pretty special memory. So yeah, two introductions to Star Wars. The first when I was very little, 5, 6, and then 11, 12 for Phantom Menace.
Wow, that's actually funnily enough. There's a lot of like similar comparisons to myself getting into Star Wars. So I was probably around that age of maybe 5 or 6 when I first got
There
into
you go.
Star Wars. It was during the original trilogies were coming out, and I'm a few years older than you, but I remember collecting the stickers. They had the sticker books, and you could
Okay.
collect the collectible stickers to put in the sticker books. And I remember collecting those as a kid. I remember getting the VHSs and watching those. In fact, I remember specifically we used to holiday down the south coast, south of Sydney, when I was a young kid, and I remember going to a video store and picking up a Star Wars VHS because you could get the week. If you remember renting videos, and younger
Of
listeners won't
course.
be as
Yeah, yeah,
familiar.
yeah, yeah.
But you would have the weekly like dollar for a week
Yeah.
or $2 or whatever it is. Um, and I picked up a Star Wars one, and I didn't realize it was behind the scenes making of Star Wars
Was it
VHS.
from Star Wars to Jedi?
It may be. I'm not sure. This is literally
Yeah.
now as many years as you are old almost ago. So like that, I remember watching that on repeat and just watching how they made the movie. And I didn't understand it, but I just loved watching the
I
stuff.
think,
I think they talk about making the sounds, how they did all the sound
yeah,
effects in
it
there
sounds
and
it
everything.
sounds like it's from Star Wars to Jedi, which is, in my opinion, probably equally, if not better, than the movies themselves. It's amazing peek behind all the making. I mean, we work in similar industries, so I work in the creative industries, similar to yourself, and like the Industrial Light and Magic, the ILM
Mhm.
studios, and all the trickery and stop motion. It's one of the massive draw cards to me of Star Wars and all the amazing things. So yeah, I can resonate with that. That documentary is very, very, very special.
Yeah, so I remember this one summer holidays watching that on repeat over and over again. And like I said, the one thing that sticks out in my head was the image of Vader firing up the Star Wars, like firing up the lightsaber, firing up Star Wars, firing up the lightsaber, and them talking about the sounds and how they made it and banging on metal piping or whatever I think it
Yeah,
was
yeah,
to get that.
for the
Yeah.
and I think they used it for the TIE fighters or something, or the blaster sounds or something.
Uh
Yeah,
huh. Yeah.
amazing stuff.
And so my next real memory after that was the late 90s.
Yeah,
And it was the re-release when they had did the re-release with the digital re-release that came out on VHS. At that time, George Lucas did like a remastered version that added in stuff, and that was all in the hype coming up to the Phantom Menace, and then seeing the Phantom Menace in the cinema, and it was my first ever midnight screening
so
that
good.
I went to. So I went to a midnight screening of that, and it was the first time I ever saw people in cosplay up close as
Is
well.
that right? There
So
you go.
yeah, so I had people dressed as Sith and as Jedi's, and they reenacted a lightsaber duel at the front of the cinema before the movie started, and everyone was cheering. It was
That's so
amazing.
so good.
Yeah,
It's amazing.
so I was a few years older than you. I would have been about 20 years old at the time that happened. So it was, yeah, that's a core memory, a Star Wars memory for me.
Yeah. No, the re-release. There's been a lot of talk about the re-release actually, because that I don't know if you know much about Hot Toys, the 1/6 scale figures, but
Yeah, a little bit.
there was the Dewback just got released or announced by Hot
Oh,
Toys, and it's from the original A New Hope, but it has hair on it. And there was all these fans that were up in arms saying Dewbacks don't have hair on them, and of course in the first undigitally mastered versions they did.
they did. Yeah.
but very few people have seen those original unmastered versions of Star Wars, because they've never been released outside of VHS, and most VHSs, if they still exist, are fried from people like you and me rewinding them and playing them again and rewinding
Yes.
them and playing them again. So
Yes.
yeah, it's
Yes.
super interesting.
Let's go into, like, 'cause obviously it's great to nerd out about Star Wars and our love of it. And like I said, that's I always start with where did you love it, but let's talk about the collecting part of it as well, because this is
Sure.
a collecting podcast. Your collection, and funnily enough, you referenced the Hot Toys and 1/6
Yeah.
scale. That's a big part of your collection.
Yeah.
When did the collecting start? Is that a more recent thing, or is that something you've always had Star Wars things laying around?
Yeah, so my first Star Wars toy, you'd probably remember these. I wasn't old enough to have the cool Kenner toys.
Mhm.
So when I was growing up, it was Power of the Force toys, which were these horrible kind of bulky He-Men things.
I do remember those.
And they were so shit. But I have lots of I have lots of very fond memories of them. And I had my first collecting piece that I used to play with nonstop was a Scout Trooper and Scout Trooper bike Power of the Force figure. And when you used to throw the speeder bike, it used to explode into about 1 million pieces, and you'd have to spend like half an hour trying to put it back together and clip it in. And I've got to try and find one. I've been doing some kind of soft searches on eBay and stuff, but they're not overly easy to find. So if anyone knows of any, let me know. But yeah, so that was my first ever memorable Star Wars piece. And then when I moved to Australia, all my belongings in the UK, kind of, I had to sell most of my things, and just practically emigrating out to a new country, you can't take everything with you. So
Of course.
I really started afresh when I came here. It was around 2007, 2008. And me and my wife run a creative agency in Newcastle. So design, photography, marketing, web stuff, all that kind of shenanigans. And
Mhm.
we had a client that found out that I was a real big Star Wars nerd. Like, I would say maybe like 2014, 2015. And at the end, like every meeting, he would just bring me something.
Oh,
So
cool.
he would bring me this, a helmet that his kids had, when they were younger. So I had like a clone trooper, phase 1 clone trooper helmet that he'd bring me. And then that
Nice.
sat on the shelf. And then, he'd bring me, I don't know, like little kit AT-ATs or various things. And then at the end of this project, he said, "I've got something for you, but you're going to have to come outside." I said, "All right, then." We came outside, and he opened his boot, and he had a massive Legacy Millennium Falcon, which was like a Hasbro re-release from like the early
Oh,
2000s.
wow, they're huge, those
They're
things.
huge. It's like it's in terms of size, it's roughly about the same size as the studio used model. It's not as accurate, obviously, because it's a toy, but
No. Yeah, yeah.
it's big. So he gave me this, and then all this stuff kind of sat on my shelves at the studio at our business. And Star Wars things or any kind of fandom, like whether it's Batman or Star Wars or whatever it might be, it's like
Yeah.
it becomes a really easy thing for people to buy for you, doesn't it? If they know that you like it.
Mhm. Mhm. Yep.
So it became like this bloody magnet that like every every birthday, or like if someone saw something, I'd get a message. And so the collection actually built at my work, which is where my collection is now in its
Mm.
new form. So that happened about 10 years ago. And then I would say over the last 5 years is where I kind of started to curate it. So
Yeah.
I run the Hyperdrive Facebook group, and contribute to the Hyperdrive YouTube channel. And
Yep.
we commission on the Facebook group like a lot of artists that have worked on the sets, some of them, or how are incredibly gifted and kind of make something look about as good, if not better, than the real thing. From original scans and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
from there, I started to build a lot of good relationships with the makers and various things. And then it just snowballed out of control, I would say, the last 5 years. So I started curating things, and then I'd learn too much about something of like, oh, that thing that I have here isn't quite accurate, so let's find the next one, and then I'd sell that, and you probably know exactly what it's like. It's
I do, and it's funny you say about the with the Hyperdrive Star Wars channel, because anyone who's familiar with listening to the podcast and listen to the Star Wars episode in the first season would know that my first ever Star Wars guest on the show was George Medina, aka the Medinalorian, who
George,
was
my buddy.
who was the person that you run this with. So when I originally reached out and we were chatting through Instagram, I didn't realize that connection happened, and then like
Yeah,
we kind of put two and two together, and it was like, oh, awesome! You know him, I know him. You're in
yeah.
Australia, I'm in Australia. That was funny, those little connections there. But how did you? I want to talk about your agency a little bit too, because you
Sure.
mentioned it a couple of times, and the fact that you've got the set up there at your agency. But just on the YouTube thing, how did you get involved with George? How did you meet him?
So I met George through all Instagram, all social media. So in about, I think the Facebook group was founded by Christian Goals, who's our friend in Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and George obviously founded the YouTube channel probably back. Was it the Hyperdrive when you interviewed him, or was it MCE originally? Maybe that he was running the
I
other.
thought, well, yeah, he was doing MCE at the time,
Yeah,
and I think Hyperdrive came in just just past that. I think it was just
yeah,
past
cool.
that. Yeah.
So I think the Facebook group has been around since about 2019, 2018, 2019, but it was traditionally
Mm.
just like a German collecting group for Christian and a bunch of his friends to kind of share their collections. And in 2020, obviously the pandemic happened, and
Mhm.
I think everyone in the collecting world went online.
Went
So
nuts. Went
yeah,
nuts ordering things, right? We couldn't go anywhere, so we
yeah.
were like, bring our collection to us.
Yeah, and I think everyone was obviously technology improved, because there's a lot of collectors, particularly in Star Wars, but other fandoms too, that are obviously a lot older than me and you,
Hmm.
and technology wasn't necessarily how they connected. So what the
Yeah.
pandemic did is it forced people onto platforms like Facebook that were an older generation, that were these
Hmm.
amazing collectors, and you had this whole amazing cycle of education that was happening. So things like the prop replica forums and things like that, that had been on those groups for years, they would come over to the Facebook. They created a group there,
Yeah.
and all this community started to develop. So that happened on Facebook, and then George started the YouTube channel around 2 years ago, I believe, which is when you would have, if it's around that time, when you would have chatted with him, the Hyperdrive. And we met via Instagram, basically, just in messages. And we had a lot of mutual friends on Instagram that were following. But being in Australia, you would find this yourself, like we're quite isolated here,
Hmm.
um, from lots of people. So I've never met any of these. I've met a few of them now, but I'd never met any of them in the flesh. And we were all just talking online and connecting, and
Mm. Yep.
found the Facebook group with Christian, started involving myself there, and working with George on the live shows initially for the Hyperdrive, and then started contributing content last year. So yeah.
Nice, and you've done an amazing job. I've watched a couple of episodes with you on the Smuggler's Den episodes as well. I
Thank
really
you.
enjoy watching those. I really enjoy seeing, like, every time you guys are bringing out a new prop, a new replica. There was the guy who's, I can't think of his name, but he's got the big silver tubing that comes out of his face, and
YouTube,
he
yeah, Benthic, yeah.
yes, from Rogue One, isn't it?
Rogue One, yeah, that
Yes,
that
yeah.
thing that thing's shipping at the moment, so I'm
Oh
really
yeah,
excited to get that. But so Ben Huckabee, who was the maker that did that,
yeah.
he just finished working on the Ahsoka series, so he was in the prop department for Ahsoka.
Oh
So
wow.
he was one of the makers that made contributed to making Sabine's costume.
I'm geeking out now. But P.S. I'm just gonna like say spoiler free zone for
Yeah,
Ahsoka.
sure, sure,
I
sure.
actually
Thank
haven't
you.
watched the first
Okay.
couple episodes yet as well. I've just started. My girlfriend and I, because I saw the quote online saying that Dave Filoni says people should watch season 4 of Rebels, but
Yes.
prior to watching Ahsoka. So I said, well, we've got to watch Rebels because I haven't watched Rebels yet. And
Okay.
so It's just one of those things I never got around to watching.
Well,
So we've literally
me,
been, for the last week, we've been binging a couple of episodes
okay.
every night. So we're almost, I think we're up to season 9 of episode. No, so it's season 2, episode 9 is what
Okay,
we're
you're
up to.
quite
We
far
literally
through it.
just watched something before. Yeah, we just watched one just before I started recording with you. We're actually when we're having dinner.
Well, I
So
did. Me
yeah,
and me and George last couple of weeks ago. We did. I'll send you the link. We did a little video of like essential episodes to watch in Clone
okay.
Wars and Rebels. So if you did get impatient, you could skip ahead with that watch list.
I'm actually enjoying Rebels. I'm
It's
gonna watch.
good. Yeah,
We've committed to watching the whole thing from
it's JD.
start to
It's
finish.
I think it's the best Star Wars that's ever been made. Rebels. It's uh, you are going to go on quite the journey over the next couple of weeks. I'm very excited for you to
I,
experience that for the
I
first
was
time.
quite yeah. Well, I was quite like it was for me. It was like exciting seeing in the Inquisitors after
Yeah,
watching them in Obi-Wan
yeah, yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
So I was like, yeah, this is really cool. Like, I mean,
No,
there's
you're going to dig
obviously
it.
an element of it's a kid's like animation
Yeah,
still in some of the cases, but that also there's so much like Star Wars folklore and bits that I'm going, and like I picked that Ahsoka was going to turn up originally. Actually, I
yeah,
don't want to go to too many spoilers in there, but I picked when she was going to turn up. Like some of that I could predict, but I
yeah,
was like, I've been really enjoying watching it, and
yeah.
we're definitely going to
Rebels
watch
is
it all.
really special. And did you see Clone Wars or some of Clone Wars
We've
at
seen
all?
some of. I think I only got up to about the end of season 1 of Clone Wars, and then
Cool.
we watched so much content. It just was one of those things that kind of
Yeah.
got dropped off,
Well,
and then but in favor of the live action stuff like Mandalorian and other stuff.
watch the last episode of ever made of Clone Wars as well. I'd say if
Okay,
you only watch that, so season seven, final episode, Clone Wars, before you watch Ahsoka, and between that and
okay,
Rebels, you're good as gold.
okay. Sweet. Now, just like I said, spoiler free zone. What's
No worries.
what would you give it out of 10? Like just
Uh,
quickly out of 10,
the,
those first 2 episodes.
the Ahsoka shows 10 out of 10.
Nice. Okay, nice.
Yeah,
I'm looking
there's
forward to
no
it.
other way. It's not a 9.5. It's not a 9. It's for me, it's a 10 out of 10. I've had some arguments with people that it's not a 10, but for me, it's a 10.
Wow, that's some pretty big shoes there.
Yeah,
That's pretty good.
I think
I'm
it's
looking forward to it.
possibly some of the best Star Wars that's ever been made in live
Well,
action.
I mean, seeing Rosario Dawson when she turned up in The Mandalorian, I was like,
Yeah,
okay,
it's
like
perfectly cast.
yeah,
I think, I mean, the one thing about the cartoons is obviously Dave Filoni.
uh-huh.
I think his work, directing and narrative and storytelling is phenomenal. And to see him, obviously, what he did with the Mandalorian, with Favreau, and it's just a step up from the Mandalorian. I mean, I've only seen 2 episodes, so I can't comment on the whole season, but the first
Yeah.
2 episodes are 10 out of 10. You'll love it. Yeah,
Okay, nice one, nice one. Well, yeah, yeah. So we are
that's all right.
recording
I
this
will not.
a little bit ahead of when it'll release. So when people are listening to this, there'll be more than 2 episodes out.
All
But
right.
we'll see if you're still calling it 10 out of 10 in a few weeks' time. You might get some messages online like,
That's
"Hey,
right. Yeah, what are you
how's
talking about? 10 out of 10
it?"
anymore. But that's all right. But no, so Ben, who made the 2 tubes, he worked on Sabine's armor, and he did some of the casting for her helmet as well. So
Oh,
that's the
so what are
kind
you
of
getting?
maker.
What have you requisitioned from his the armory? What have you said? Like, I need this piece. Like, please
We're
get me this
working on
piece.
some things for the hyperdrive, maybe for September, end of September, so
Okay,
2023. So whenever
keep
you
an eye
listen
on
to
that.
this, keep an eye on it. Yeah, and
Okay.
there's something pretty special coming end of September for with Ben for a hyperdrive run. That's a big spoiler for us because I don't
Uh,
usually
oh,
let
okay.
that out of the bag.
Oh well. Look, this will only be like this will be coming out the first Wednesday of September, so it won't be too far ahead. So
Very
yeah,
good.
okay. But you haven't really given too much away, so that's good. But having those kind of contacts through those groups, I mean, going back to having these different collectors and people within the community. That's the reason I do this podcast, right? Is because I
Yeah,
get to, like, I love collecting. I love just geeking out about all the different nerdy things that I've grown up with, and all the
Yeah.
nostalgia. And I love to relive that nostalgia with all the people that I have on the show. So yeah, you're right. When we were able to connect and do that during the pandemic, and even now, if you want to call it post-pandemic world,
Yeah.
then
It
having
really,
those
it
communities
really is.
is really awesome.
It's really special, and I love I do genuinely love collecting things, and I love curating. Like I like lighting the collection. I like
Hmm.
displaying it a certain way, but the the real thing, the real reason why I give so much of my time to this stuff is the people and the people that I've met some of my best friends in this collecting malarkey. It's absolutely incredible, and it really is the last 5 years, and then the last 3 years since March 2020 is really, I'd say, sped up connections with people online. And
Hmm.
I grew up I grew up in the north of England, and we said, like, it was an interesting place to grow up. It wasn't a very kind place, and so I was on Yahoo chats and things like that, and various stuff
Uh-huh.
from an early age, because that was like an escapism, and to kind of, it's been a big part of my life connecting with people in that way, not just physically. So
Yeah,
for have other people do that, and then to build friends, it's not alien to me, and it's been really wonderful to have some really close friends from around the world. Yeah.
that's awesome. You're in one of those rare kind of groups right now, age wise, where people, at your age, sort of mid 30s, and in that like 30 range, you're old enough to remember the old media and like
Yeah.
we were talking about VHSs, and the way that people connected through, like when you met in the schoolyard and you found another
Yeah.
kid that loved the
Yeah.
thing. Like, I love Star Wars, you love Star Wars. Oh,
Yeah.
let's talk about Star Wars.
It's
And then when you found the kids who were like, Star Wars is crap. Like,
yeah.
I don't want to talk about that nerd stuff. Like, and now living in the life where we have the internet and you're
Yeah.
able to connect with people, and you can instantly find that group and that fandom anywhere and connect, and
Oh,
it's really cool.
it's really special. It is. And yeah, you're right. Absolutely. I mean, my dad was a computer control engineer, and we had BBCs and Acorns growing up. And I used to play, like, MS-DOS games and
Yeah.
God knows what else with floppy disks. Not the small floppy disks, the actual floppy disks that flop.
I
Um,
think the first ever like at home computer that I ever did anything on, like proper at home computer, was my uncle, who was a professor, had an IBM,
yeah.
like one of the very early old ones that you could play chess on. I remember that was like, here you can play a video game. Like, it was technically
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
video game, I said
Yeah.
quotation marks, but it was essentially playing chess on this like really janky screen. Like, and I remember that, and to where we are now is like just chalk and cheese, like
Yeah.
it's come so
Totally.
far.
Yeah, and yeah, I did, and I think it's really wonderful. I mean, seeing where it's come and all that stuff, it's technology is pretty special. I've got a young son who's just about to turn 5, and I mean, seeing how he interacts with technology and various things, it's absolutely wild. Like,
How quick they pick it up.
he can navigate the UI of an iPad like nobody's business, and it's just it's really interesting. But I do think the one thing, I mean, this isn't, Star Wars are collecting nerding out. It's kind of like tech nerding out, which me and you could probably talk about for about a million years as well. But I think the one thing that younger people of my son's age, etc., will struggle with is they don't understand, like, how it's made, because the UIs are so good.
Mm,
So I think, like, having to use MS-DOS and having to use command codes and terminals and things like that, there's something that you kind of like, oh, I understand that all behind this is ones and zeros, and
yeah.
so yeah. But no, computers from a young age, internet from a young age. But yeah, the pre that, I mean, I had in Carter 99 was like a disc that was like a pre Wikipedia for
Yes. Yeah.
history lessons and stuff. So
I remember having an encyclopedia on the shelf,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
with all the different like all the different editions, like
yeah,
or you had A, B, C, D, like the full encyclopedia, and that was where you went.
Wow.
And then having something like that on a disc, I remember seeing that when I
Yeah.
was younger and being, but we were kind of getting sidetracked with the technology part of the
We've just lost half our young audience here, but that's all right. We'll pull it back.
I think the older listeners are probably like, yeah, I remember that too. I get you. I get you. But yeah, let's bring it back to Star Wars, and I actually did say I'd talk about your agency, Head Jam Creative. So
Yeah,
your collecting room or your collecting space is literally at the office. You've
it is.
requisitioned part of the office to do that. Now, you said that you actually are partners with your wife in this agency. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's right. So I
So,
basically
did she make you do this? Did she say, "Well, you can't bring this at home. You have to keep it at the office"?
it's a great question. So yeah, so my wife is one of the first employees of HeadJam, and when I married in, I bought basically married into the business,
I'm going to
and
cut you off. She's not an employee. She's the boss, right?
that's right. Well, but when she first started for HeadJam, she was out of TAFE. She was actually employed here, so she didn't own it
Ah,
originally.
okay.
And then when I married into it, our friend Nicola, who's the owner, she was much older than us, and she retired, and we bought her out, and that was around 15 years ago now, or 13 years ago. And we have a third business partner now, Mike Preston. Mike's a pretty amazing guy. He used to run Clemenger, BBDO, creative teams, and George Patterson and various agencies around the world. And he's a very humble man. He would hate me saying this, but he's won pretty much every creative award around the world about 3 or 4 times over. And
Nice.
JD, you would have he moved to Australia in the 70s. You would have seen a lot of his ads that he created over that period, 70s, 80s, and 90s in Australia. He was responsible for like the Grim Reaper ads for RTA and the Tosser ads and the Reach Mouth ads and all
Oh
that
yes,
classic
yeah.
advertising. That was Mike. So,
I
so
love
yeah,
those tosser ads.
yeah,
Anyone who lives out of Australia doesn't know what a tosser is, but essentially it's someone that's littering. That
yeah,
was a
that's
littering
right,
company.
exactly. So yeah, so she's a designer. My background's photographic and film production. So I was in the UK, in London, working and assisting. When I moved to Australia with my wife, we started the agency, bought into it, changed it from a print design business back in the early 2000s to a multidisciplinary agency. And obviously, with my background, production, and then my dad, the computer control engineering and coding from a young age, that's kind of why we kind of brought on those additional skill sets. But yeah, my house is tiny. So to go back to the Star Wars collecting, I live in a little miner's cottage, which for those in America or other parts of the world, it's got 2 bedrooms, but it's not really a 2-bedroom house.
It's a shack
It's a
almost.
shack. Yeah, it's made of
Yeah.
wood. It's a tin roof. I mean, Australian building standards are very interesting compared to the rest of the world. Um, but yeah, so we have a big warehouse where our agency is, and we do a lot of video production, and we have a post-production facility here where we do our editing and sound mixing and color grading, and it's a big black room, and it had lots of wall space. So when all this stuff started piling up, and you're right, I got a little chat from Sarah about things at home and things being a bit messy. I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I should do it properly, and I curated basically the room to function so that it could still be an edit suite. So, it's all very dimly lit.
Hmm.
It's all spotlit, like a museum. It's all black displays, wall to wall, ceiling to floor. It's about as polished as I could make it to kind of get away with collecting toys. So I was like, well, if I can make it look really, impressive with lighting and various things, it's a bit of an experience for people that come up and clients.
Yep.
It's also a good way to weed out clients now, isn't it? Like if they come up and they're like, "Oh, I'm a Trekkie," I can be like, "Oh, well, that's unfortunate." I'm only joking. I do like Star Trek.
A true nerd loves everything, right?
That's right, yeah. But it's good, and it's been really nice actually to have a space here. So the edit suites are obviously it's a really good place for me to produce content for the YouTube channel or my own Instagram or various things, and podcasts with wonderful people like yourself, and it's a nice environment to sit in. It's very quiet. It's sound dampened. There's no light. It's a cool space. But yeah, I guess practically it came about. We had a space here. My house is tiny, and I had a lot of stuff. So yeah.
But look, it's a kind of space that most people could be envious of, right? So you're very fortunate at the same time
Mm,
to be able to do that. And when you say curated, it is literally it's like a gallery in behind you, right?
thank
That I
you.
can see right now. And I actually will say this, like for anyone who has been to your Instagram or seen your videos, especially on Instagram, I noticed when I even earlier just before we started recording, I was going through and looking through your reels on there as well. And one of the things that's kind of stuck out in my mind was when you look in the background, like when you're recording,
Yep.
it almost looks like a digital backdrop or something. Like it
Yeah.
almost looks unreal. Your background, but
Yeah.
it is real. It is the
It is real.
actual.
But I've heard that a lot,
Yeah,
and I think yeah, I think there's something to that. It does look really weird. I mean, it's kind of weird that I've got most of my
good
main
weird.
position. Good weird, yeah. But I also sit in front of a bunch of chairs because there's like theatre seats that are facing the screen, and because the
Hmm.
screen comes down over where I normally sit, where a computer is, it kind of just looks like I've got a weird audience looking at the back of my head. Um, but no, it's a good space. You're right. I'm very fortunate to have. I mean, the room's about 8, maybe 7 meters by. It's like a square, basically. Let's go 6 by 6 squared, which is a massive
Okay.
space, right? To have a collection in. So yeah, super fortunate to have it. But yeah, it's at work. I guess that's the payoff. I have to come in and look at it.
A
But I
little
spend all my
little
time at work anyway, so that
Hey, yeah, that if you can make your workspace look that beautiful, most people would be envious of that, right? And what I always say is, as a little bit of a spoiler ahead for the podcast, I do actually have a collector that's going to be on the episode after you,
yeah,
who has a space that's bigger than your space.
amazing. So
Yeah,
good. In Star
yeah,
Wars or
different
okay, cool.
collection, different
Wicked.
collection. But pretty epic uh, space. So I would definitely tell people to check that out as well.
So good.
But like I said, curated. You have that museum quality, and you actually did a video which I watched recently on the Hyperdrive channel about the ultimate guide to Star Wars collecting.
Yeah.
That really broke it down for people who were sort of like beginner to maybe intermediate collectors. And I loved a lot of the information we've spoken about. You've spoken about the Facebook and
Mm,
those places. So you gave a lot of advice for people to go and join those groups and really get in amongst it. But you also gave them great advice on displaying the statues and things like that as well. What
yeah.
was the hardest part of the setup for what you've got there?
Yeah, so I'd say it's quite my collection's deceptively I'm hesitant to use the word small, but it looks like there's a lot more stuff than there actually is.
Okay.
And the reason for that is like I have one item per storage display.
Yeah.
So with the exceptions of the 1/6 figures, which I've created like strange family portraits with,
Hmm.
but because of that, I think the majority of people that collect, the idea is you put lots of stuff in a small amount of space as possible. So um, it looks a lot bigger than it is. So for me, because I have I think I talk in that video around like how I've budgeted for it because a lot of people think
Yeah.
I'm a multimillionaire, and I really wish that was the case. And if I was a multimillionaire, my collection
Living in a
would
shack.
would be very different. Yeah, my house would be very different. I should have a photo of my house and where I live. It's like, if you want to collect, you have to live like this. but but no, I mean, we basically, I have a pretty decent salary. So in Australia, I earn, I would say above average, not a crazy salary, but we
Hmm.
we
Still need a
allocate
budget.
we allocate 10% of our income every week, me and Sarah. So I get 10% of our income that goes into my collecting fund. She has
Hmm.
10% of her income that goes into her fund for her hobbies.
Hmm.
And then the rest of our money is, divided up into house bills, our mortgage, various things.
Yep.
It basically works out that I have about 150 Australian dollars. So it's about 100 US dollars a week. to be able to budget for my collection. So it's
Which
about,
is not, it is more than some people for sure,
yeah,
but it isn't. It's definitely, like you said, it's not millionaire status or anything. Like,
yeah,
it still requires some level of, like you said, careful budgeting and planning when you're buying a piece, right?
yeah. It's, you know, I have the ability to buy, I would say, 2 or 3 major pieces a year,
Yeah.
or you know, 10 smaller pieces. But what has happened in my favor, and what did happen during the pandemic, which is really unfortunate for new collectors, but has worked for people that have been collecting a little bit longer, is a lot of the collectibles that I had pre 2020,
Went up.
everything jumped up in value
Mhm.
during the pandemic.
Mhm.
So some of the more expensive pieces that I have in my collection these days would very much be out of the reach of a lot of collectors. So, you know, there's an Ahsoka Tano EFX lightsaber that I have, that's signed by Dave Filoni.
You just
And when
thought that was just your most recent reel, I think.
Yeah, I did one for the, you know, I tried to find things that for the Ahsoka series to kind of put out, but that was released in 2009, so I didn't buy it new, but when it came out new, it was $350 US, and now
Okay.
it's about between $3,000 and $5,000 is
Wow.
what it US dollars is what it's selling for. So I paid not that amount. I paid somewhere in the middle between the retail price and where it's at, so a couple of grand. But
Which probably stung at the time, but now
it
you're
really, really stung.
like, wow.
But so
Yeah.
there's elements like that I was able to then maybe trade up to other items and various things. And I also use a lot of you know, a lot of the big people that make props, like Regal Robot is one of my favorite companies in the States, that make like
Okay.
they make life size like replicas. I mean, I'll bring one up for you so you can see while I'm
Yeah.
talking about it.
I've
So
seen a
like
few of the things online
so
before.
like
Oh yeah, that's
the,
the crushed
yeah, and the
skull.
Rancor, for example, is it's like taken from the actual Rancor that was on Return of the Jedi, and it's as screen accurate as you can get. So it's molded from the
Mm.
original piece, and it's signed by Phil Tippett, the original ILM artist. And
I,
you know, so things like that, they do payment plans, is what I'm getting at. So you pay it off basically over the course of 12 months. And that's the only way I can kind of grab these things, basically, is, you know, a percentage of my allowance each week, call it an allowance at 35, but that's what it is, is you know, allocated to you know, to that payment plan. And you just got to be really diligent with your money, basically, when you start collecting stuff. And the biggest thing for me is I love lots of fandoms. You know, you've got some really awesome Batman stuff just behind you there, and you know, one of the most amazing fandoms that, you know, I'm a big Batman fan, particularly the Tim Burton Batmans, Batman and Batman Return. That's kind of, for me,
Mhm.
it's the epitome of cinema. You know, his work. There we go.
I'm just
Yeah.
showing the Batmobile, the Tim Burton Batmobile.
So, you know, take every single week and every day, I have to stop myself from buying Batman merch. And
Why would
it
you do
really
it?
is.
He's so cool. Like,
I
no,
know.
I'm kidding.
But it really, it's an embargo I have on myself. It's like I have to. I said at the beginning, like, I'm a compulsive personality, like a lot of collectors are.
Hmm.
You know, I incessantly research things. I go really hard at stuff, and I had to stick to Star Wars. Otherwise, I just practically wouldn't, you know, be able to eat. So.
Sarah would have to cut you off.
Yeah, that's right. She would. Yeah, she'd cut more than my allowance off.
I just it makes me think. If are you familiar with the meme of Dave Chappelle
No,
when he's like, where he's the crackhead, Dave Chappelle crackhead,
no,
and
I haven't seen
it,
this one.
oh, so it's an old meme. I'm going back 10 years or more in meme culture here, but there used to be it was a photo of him scratching it. It was literally taken from this Dave Chappelle skit. It was like, have you got any more, and so the meme would always be like, whatever, have you got
Yeah,
any more of
yeah,
XYZ thing?
it's what
And
it
I was
feels
just
like.
I was just imagining you, like, as Sarah cuts you off, like, you got any more of that Star Wars
Yeah,
stuff, man? Like,
totally. But yeah, so it's all Star Wars, and then even within Star Wars, my collection has kind of two types of things in it. It's got 1/6 figures, which are basically giant action figures. So that's, you know, me playing with dolls, basically.
Which is at the
And
start of another reel, which I actually chuckled out loud when I saw you
literally
doing
playing with dolls. Yeah.
the Cad Bane
Yeah.
when you did the Cad Bane review. I love that one.
Yeah.
People should go check out the Cad
But
Bane review you did.
there's a lot of people that collect these toys, and they get really angry when people call them like, dolls or whatever. I'm like, well, realistically, like we are kind of dressing characters here, like call it what it is. But so there's 1/6 scale figures, and then 1-to-1 props or items is kind of how or studio style scale models is what my collection's made up of. Yeah.
Nice. And look, it is an absolutely amazing collection. I'm just blown away every time I see it. Every time I watch the reels, every time I see it on the videos, like it's on YouTube as well. I'm always blown away by it. Going back quickly just to that ultimate guide video that you did,
Yeah.
like because I imagine that probably took a little while to plan out and put all the pieces of that together. Was there anything you learnt about yourself as a collector or learnt about your collection that you
Yeah.
kind of became more self-aware of by doing that video?
Yeah, I mean, it's really producing content in any way. It's like it's really, I struggle with it. I mean, I've been a visual communication professional in photography and video for most of my life, and
Mhm.
I think the hardest thing I've ever had to do is like edit a video that I am in. And it's just the worst thing. It's like all your insecurities, everything kind of comes out, right? You like second guess yourself, like you kind of it's really awkward. And I still struggle with watching content. Like I have to watch it to practically edit it, but
But after
I
that, you
don't
don't touch it?
I don't like going back and watching stuff. No, it's especially the live things that I do. Like I can't do it. So but I've done that video. I did a series about 18 months ago. I did like some shorts on TikTok and Instagram, which touched on like some of the things for that.
Mhm.
So this time around, it was a lot easier. But the first time around, yeah, I think the biggest thing was coming to terms with like how diligent I had been in terms of budgeting
Mhm.
and just really looking at that and understanding how that worked. It was kind of reaffirming for me to go, okay, yeah, you actually have done quite a good job here, because doing what me and you do, JD, like in the collecting world or the fandom world, like we are surrounded by temptation, right? Like we literally put ourselves,
Every day. Every day.
like we're looking at all the new releases and all our friends are getting hyped up, and
Uh-huh.
the stories are there. It's like this is released and that's released and have you seen this? And
Uh-huh.
it's a hell of a lot of willpower to not just buy everything, and not to get a credit card and put everything on it. So yeah, I think that was a big realization. And then the other thing is just like reaffirming like how much I love presenting the collectibles. So I'd say that's there's lots of really amazing collections out there, like that present really really well, but that for me is what I've really loved. I like in photography, I like lighting things like the 1/6 scale figures. I create like weird little family portraits of them. It's just like taking a group photograph of people. And it's
Yeah.
all the subtleties, it's like half a degree of a movement on an action figure. It's not like big things, it's really small things. And it can take those unboxing videos, the actual video producing it is super quick. And then posing the figures, sometimes it takes over an hour and a half just to get the figures posed. And I know that sounds absolutely ludicrous, but these things, if you want to do them well, it's just an absolute nightmare. And then they fall over and, you got to start again. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
anyone who does toy photography would probably be familiar with some of that
Oh
as
my
well.
god. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Oh, there's some amazing toy photographers out there. It's unbelievable what they do. But yeah,
Mhm.
reaffirmed a bunch of stuff. And the biggest thing for me is just reaffirming, the friends that I've made and the community and how important that's been to me. And I think I spent like quarter of the video just talking about YouTube channels and groups and various things. So yeah, no, it's great. It's why I'm interested in collecting still is people.
And it's great that you could have that introspective moment, when you're doing that and really recognize like what do you do well as a collector, maybe what you don't do well as a collector. Is actually, I'll ask you that. Is there something you don't think you do well as a collector or that you think you could improve?
That's a really great question. I haven't probably avoided asking myself that, to be honest.
Yeah, that's too much introspection for one
No,
day.
no, no, it's good. I think no matter how much I plan, I still have impulse purchases. And
Hmm.
impulse purchases for collections like mine, they're not so like with Hot Toys, for example, the 1/6 scale figures, they get announced, you pre-order them, and then it might be
Yep.
1 to 2 years before they actually show up.
Yep.
So if you make a buying mistake on something that comes in 2 years' time, it's like it's a bit weird, right? Because like so you kind of have to check yourself on the impulse buys because it's not like you go to the shop and buy something off the shelf. It's like this thing
Uh-huh.
takes 12 months, 2 years. Like I just recently, I'm trying to apply to be part of the 501st, the
Oh yeah.
cosplay garrison in
Yeah,
Australia.
nice.
Yeah, and I've been working with an amazing artist in Melbourne to make a Boba Fett cosplay for me. But that's taken 18 months of planning, 12 months of making. So if you make an impulse purchase decision online on large items like this and
Where
they're
does
very
the money
like
come from after that? Yeah.
yeah, and you've also then lost maybe 2 years, and then something
Mm.
rocks up and you sell it, and it is definitely feels bad. So yeah, I would say still need to improve my impulse purchases, like every collector, I think. And it's really at this point, it's curating, and then some things have to go. I can't collect everything. I've got to make decisions now on what I sell. I don't want to keep things in boxes in a storage unit. Like I've made the room so all my boxes are actually stored in this room, like the plinths that the displays stay on. They're all storage for boxes, and that was a big
Ah,
thing for
smart.
my collection. I was like, okay, not only do I have to store the collection here, I have to store the boxes because some of my friends in the collecting world, they have storage units that are like, in Australia, they'd be like $300-$400 a month.
Wow.
For the space that you need. And it's why I can't collect statues as an example, because the statue's like 10 times the size of the box as like a action figure. So
Hmm.
it's kind of
Hmm.
figuring this out and just kind of staying true to that. But yeah, I've got to curate a little bit more because I want to maintain the space each item in my collection has. I don't want to overcrowd them.
Yeah, and I think the way that your collection looks now is kind of perfect in that
Thank you, mate.
respect because
That's
you do
very
have
kind.
that space and sort of like that visual room to breathe between the items and stuff as well. And I think as somewhere where you may bring people in, like
Yeah,
to check out your space, it's nice because they can take time looking at one piece and not be it's kind of like you look at some of the stuff on my shelves, and sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming just looking at everything on a shelf because there's
sure.
so much going on visually,
Yeah.
and that is one of the things that happens as a collector sometimes.
Oh,
That's what
totally.
it's great to have all these things in my
Yeah.
collection, but it's also like how do I display them? That's that, and
Yeah.
I love the way that yours is displayed. It's really cool.
Thanks, JD. Yeah, no, and and it's exciting as well curating a collection when when you've had it. Some of these items I've been sitting with for years, and at some point, it's not that you get bored of them, but you want to rotate them. And I think passing items on to other collectors is really cool too. And you can
Mhm.
trade for things, and I kind of like that, element too. So yeah, it's exciting.
Well, I'm going to wrap up soon because we're closing in on an hour, I think, just about of recording. But before we wrap up, I'm just going to actually follow on from what you just said. Tell me about what's the best trade you've made in the Star
Oh,
Wars.
this is quite a good story, actually. It's not a trade, but it's a purchase. Does that count? Can I tell you a good story about a
Oh
purchase?
yeah, sure, done. Tell me.
Um, so there's a what is JD? You might be able to help me here. What is the weird appliance center called that's in regional Australia? I'm going
The
blank.
good guys.
It's not the Good Guys. It's a anyway. For listeners, you can think of a rural town if you're in America on the on your Rust Belt area, like in the middle of nowhere, or if you're in the UK, I don't know, down Cornwall somewhere. And out out in regional New South Wales a number of years ago. I think it was 2021. There's a C3PO in my collection, which is like a half scale. It's like over a meter tall. And I walked into this appliance center, and basically this guy that ran this appliance center just randomly had a Star Wars interest. And he'd been buying all these Star Wars statues and things for years because he liked it, but no one would ever buy it because it's just in the middle of nowhere in regional New South Wales. And I picked up this C3PO, which at the time was like sold out for, 6 or 7 years. And on the secondhand market was, 5,000-6,000 Australian dollars. And I got it for retail, which was amazing. It's the most random thing. And, to find things like that. And
that's cool.
In Australia, as you would know, JD, we don't, like in America, there's the whole culture of like toy hunting.
Yeah.
Because they have lots of big stores, right? And lots of
places. We don't have a lot of that, no.
And, we've got in Sydney, I can think of King's Comics and, maybe a Zing or a Pop. Like there's so few that kind of exist here. So to find something in that way was really, really cool. And that's probably, I would say, my my best kind of collectible find that I've ever had.
That's a cool one. And I can see it in the top corner behind you. It looks like a pretty epic statue.
Yeah, it's very cool. He's a good guy there.
Luke, mate, that's a wonderful story. And as I said, I am going to wrap it up here because it has been almost an hour, and I know that it's late here in Australian time, and you're going to be on even later soon with our friend George that you were talking about.
Yeah. Me and George are doing a live show tonight.
Live show. So I'll let you go and get prepared for that, and it's definite dedication. But before I let you go, I mean, obviously, if people want to go and watch a live show, where do they find you? Where do they go to find that Star Wars bloke?
Yeah, on pretty much all the socials, you can find me at that Star Wars bloke. And an easy way to find me is the Hyperdrive. That's easy to remember. We're on both Facebook as the group and also the YouTube channel. And me and George share the YouTube channel duties. And there's me, George, Christian on Facebook, and a bunch of other admins and mods. But come say hi if you're into Star Wars and interested in collecting. We're a friendly bunch. So you can ask away. And if you've got any questions, you're more than welcome to send me a DM on Instagram.
Perfect. And I'll definitely link all those things in the description, as well as I'll link that video, The Ultimate Guide to Star Wars Collecting, that I was talking about as well.
Awesome.
If they want to go and check it out. So, Luke, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to start saying, I might start saying another one on the shelf, when it comes to, because I'm the collector of collectors, and I now have another one in my collection here.
I love that. So, it's like you're collecting them.
Yes, so I have another collector on the shelf. So thank you, and for people listening as well, I am committed to this season, four episodes coming out 16 weeks in a row. So I am, as you can hear, recording with multiple people now to get that content front loaded, so you can be there every week listening and collecting with us. So if you do love the podcast, go in and give it a rate. Give it a review on the podcast platforms that you listen to, because all that is going to help me and help other collectors to find these conversations and come and geek out with all of us as well. So thank you very much. And Luke, mate, may the force be with you.
You too, my friend. Thank you so much.